Well, good morning from New York City. My name is Robert Schonfeld. I'm a retired curator and advisor in the fine and decorative arts, and presently I have the honor and the privilege to be a guest speaker with Viking Ocean Cruises, and today to be making this presentation to you on the subject of some of the cultural and artistic attractions in Amsterdam and Bruges. As it happens, I'll be joining the Viking Mars in 3 or 4 days on an itinerary that includes these ports, but will not be presenting this particular lecture. So if any of you are going to be joining me on that itinerary, let's consider this one a bonus. So let's get started here with the title slide. On the left is a self-portrait by Rembrandt from 1661, and it is his only self-portrait as a biblical figure, in this case, the Apostle Paul. And not to be too disrespectful to Rembrandt, but there on the right is something that is equally germane to this presentation, which is one of the destination items in Bruges in particular, which is French fries together with the beer. And I promise you we'll be getting to both of these as time goes on. So Amsterdam is a relatively small city, but it contains more than 75 museums. To give you, and other cultural attractions, to give you some idea, San Francisco, also a relatively small city, has about 50 museums. And among other things, Amsterdam shares with Bruges the nickname Venice of the North because of the beautiful canals. Here you see the well-known sign, the block letters Amsterdam, set up in the museum square. I'm told that recently they've been removed. I hope it's not true. We'll find out when we get there, because it is a wonderful attraction and it is generally teeming with young people climbing all over it and showing no interest at all in the great museums that are around them, but just having one hell of a good time with the sign. So I hope it remains, and we'll find out pretty soon. A couple of shots of the renovation of the entrance to the Rijksmuseum, famous bicycles, of course. The renovation of the Rijksmuseum, it might be the best renovation of a major international museum I've ever encountered. It's simply a joy. They've got it set up so that you have sort of a series of galleries with sort of greatest hits, and then have the option of going off to explore further in detail. And it's just a great way to visit a museum like this one. Now we're going to discuss very briefly, I promise there's only a couple of maps, the way in which the Dutch century, the 17th century, came about. And the short answer is trade. And here you see some of the trade routes undertaken by the Dutch. And now we see the town hall in Amsterdam, which was originally constructed in 1605 and later became the stock exchange, rather first the bank and then the stock exchange for Amsterdam, which was the crucial underpinning of the financial wherewithal that allowed such a small country to become such a major trading power. The flags you see here, the Dutch East and Dutch West Indies trading companies, which had monopolies on trade in either direction from Amsterdam. And here's the only other map, I promise, showing some of the remaining trade routes, things coming from the east. So this one I promised several times, but this one is in fact the last map showing the trade routes originating from the east. Spices would come from Persia, textiles, and so forth. And here is a picture, large picture from the Rijksmuseum of 1615 by Adrian Peter van der Ven, showing the departure of a dignitary and a trading fleet from Amsterdam, which is a typical scene that you would see during this very active, explosive period in trade for Western Europe and particularly for the Netherlands. 150 years later, we see a very similar scene from Venice by Canaletto, which is more famous and more easily recognizable. But the point I wanted to make is that the Dutch were there first with this sort of picture. The one by Canaletto shows the ceremonial barge of the Doge, but we're in Amsterdam, not in Venice, so we'll continue from here. Again, we have Adrian Peters van der Ven. This one is called Fishing for Souls and is kind of an allegory, satire that's meant to depict the conflict, but for the competition rather than the conflict between Protestant and Catholic factions for souls during the period of the Dutch Revolt. So this one, ultimately, it becomes a satire. Let's now consider the idea of a militia. I've put the text on the screen, the definition, because it's a lot to read. You can read it for yourselves as I discuss this picture, but we are looking at 1633, and this is a militia painting by Frans Hals. And the militias, as you see in this definition on the screen, were originally begun in the service of the government when they were unable to raise a full army. And the main thing you will see from this and a couple of other pictures is they love dressing up. So there they are, all dressed up. And at the same time, it's worth reminding everyone looking in, I'm certainly not going to go into this discussion, but if you're curious, in America, where the provisions in the Second Amendment came from in 1789, having to do with raising a militia and bearing arms, this is the origin of those ideas. And it bears discussion, but not here. Here we want to consider the idea that there were these militia. This one's by Frans Hals. It's an unfinished picture because Hals lost interest in it. And so someone else was hired to finish it. But here we see the figure on the, just to go back for a second, the figure on the left is certainly completed by Hals, and it shows. Here's another by Hals from the year 1628, and it is called A Militiaman with a Drinking Glass, but it is better known by its more common title, The Merry Drinker. And so in addition to dressing up, as I say, these guys love to get together and drink. I just hope they didn't point their weapons at each other. The most famous of all of them, of course, is Rembrandt's Night Watch. And to me, the reason for that in one sentence is that he animates the painting. The painting becomes alive with movement and activities and different groups doing different things. We could spend an entire lecture or even a seminar on this picture, but just enjoy it on the screen while I mention to you that if you visit it at the Rijksmuseum, you're going to see something very interesting. Look at the floor in front of the painting when you get to the museum, and you will see sort of a line in the floor, but the line isn't there to keep people from getting closer to the painting. The line in the floor is in fact a slot, and the slot has been built there so that the painting, considered the single most valuable cultural object in the Netherlands, can be automatically released from its hanging fixtures, and it goes directly into that slot to a secure location so that no harm can come to it. just a little piece of trivia that you can point out to everyone else when you get to the Rijksmuseum. I wanted you to see these three self-portraits by Rembrandt showing the progression of the way in which he depicted himself, first as a young man, then in middle age, he liked to dress up, and lastly, as an, as an older man, obviously just a little bit worn out with the entire business. Johannes Vermeer, another of the greatest of the Dutch painters of the 17th century. This picture from 1667 is called The Kitchen Maid. And I'm just going to take a minute here to discuss this painting with you. The woman, a very sturdy woman with a crisp bonnet on her head, is pouring milk from a wide-mouthed jug in a room with a white painted wall and light flooding in from the left-hand side. The problem is, this is not a milkmaid, this is a kitchen maid, even though she's pouring milk. Sometimes she's referred to as a milkmaid, which would not be accurate because the milkmaid was a household employee who worked in the barn and milked the cows and made the cheese. And the kitchen maid is the one who actually worked inside the kitchen. So here we see this substantial young woman doing exactly that, but that's not the end of the story. This picture, as plain and as empty as it seems to be, is full of some important symbols. And here are the most important of them over in the corner. Let's just go back so you can get an idea. You see them there on the lower right. There they are. One of them is those tiles leaning against the wall, and one of the tiles is Cupid. In addition, that little box is a small brazier or coal burner. And one has to wonder what a coal burner is doing in a dairy kitchen, which would be the so-called cool kitchen in the house where the cooking was not done. And there's plenty of good explanation for that. Built into these paintings, and there's an entire genre of them in Dutch art, are many symbolic ideas having to do with milkmaids. Most of these are sexual in nature because the idea was to invite such contemplation on the part of the viewer. And so you have Cupid, who is unmistakably there as an amorous symbol, and you have a source of heat, which is equally unusual in this location. Among other things, these small braziers would be placed on the floor so that a woman could stand over it and warm the entire lower half of her body. I'm going to leave the symbolism there and the rest of it to your imagination, but if we ever meet, we can discuss it more fully. Just to say that a picture like this is not as simple as it seems and has a great deal of interest in terms of daily life and symbolic reference in 17th century Netherlands. There you see them both together. And we move on now to another type of painting. This is the fête champêtre, or a sort of joyous or happy outdoor scene. This one of 1667 by Dirk Hals, the older brother of Frans by 10 years. This one is an early one, just to give you an idea of the progression of these things, from 1509 by Giorgione, the Italian. And this one is a later one from 1715 by the Frenchman Nicolas Lancret. So you see that the Dutch fit very nicely into this genre tradition of outdoor activities. There you see the three of them together. Also in the Rijksmuseum, in this wonderful new setup that they have, you will find the doll houses, which are a major attraction. They're always busy, usually with children who are both astounded and delighted. This particular one, which was made around 1686, is the most remarkable of all of them. And the reason is that the dollhouse contains rooms in which are objects that were made by the same artisans who would have made these objects full size for a full-size house. Each individual item of silver, and I mean silver, flatware, each piece of porcelain, each piece of furniture, each carpet, and so forth are handmade by the same artists in order to furnish this house, which, by the way, cost about as much as a proper canal house in Amsterdam. A close-up of the interior. If you do go to the Rijksmuseum and you have the opportunity, it's worth taking your place in the little line that leads up to a platform so that you can lean in and have a look at this amazing display. Yet another one of these also there, and this one, which is actually a model, for an architect's model for a house. Quite remarkable. Good, now Tulip Mania. Since my career was in the commercial art world as well as the academic art world, Tulip Mania is always a favorite subject because it is pure and simple speculation with no real idea of what is likely to happen to values. Now, people do this for one of two reasons. One, they think the value is going to go in the direction that they want it to go, or two, they're so rich and nuts at the same time that they really don't care. If you think about these cryptocurrency activities that are going on in the art market now called NFTs, non-fungible tokens, it is a very similar type of speculation, and who's to say where that is going to end up. We know, however, where Tulip Mania ended up. This one man paid more than 500 guilders at the time, which is the middle of the 17th century. This illustration is from 1637 for one tulip bulb. And again, either he was so rich that he didn't care, it was a man, he was either so rich that he didn't care, or the value he expected to continue to increase in this wild environment of speculation. So these very, very beautiful original watercolors were used as a kind of bulb catalog, the ones you get in the mail today, except this one involves hand-colored, hand-drawn, hand-colored illustrations. There they are in person. This is the Keukenhof Garden. See, I got that word right because I've been practicing it, because I'm hoping to take that excursion when we reach Amsterdam, even if it is past tulip garden season. This is one of the largest gardens in the world, and is certainly the largest display when the time comes each year of tulips in the world. Well worth a visit under any circumstances. So here in another type of garden, fronting the Rijksmuseum and designed by Peter Kuiper, who was also the architect and designer of the Rijksmuseum itself, is a wonderful, much more formalized approach to gardening, which in this case contains the Miro sculpture, the Oiseau Lunatique, or the Crazy Bird, which was the first appearance of a sculpture by this size by Miro in the Netherlands. The Dutch have never been shy. They've always been honest about their history, And one of the products that made them rich during the golden era, the 17th century, was slaves. And they chose to confront and address this issue much more recently, 2020, with an exhibition acknowledging and delving into that history. This was very well received and very successful. We'll move now through a series of other museums and cultural attractions in Amsterdam. The first, deservedly, is the Rembrandt House, where he lived from 1639 to 1656. And as you probably know, Rembrandt did very well in the first part of his career, made bunches of money painting portraits of the wealthy class of Amsterdam. And he indulged himself with that money. He was a collector in his own right, and also purchased costumes and so forth that he liked to dress up in and paint himself and other figures. Ultimately, though, he did go bankrupt and everything had to be sold. And the house itself now is pretty much empty, although it is worth a visit for the things that it does contain, and simply to pay homage to one of the great citizens of the city. This museum is called the Troppen Museum, or the Troppen House, which is a private residence converted into a museum of the tropics, and is especially well known for its massive collections of ethnological objects. More than 175,000 of them. And so if the evidence of trade, that is to say the things brought back by the traders, are of interest to you, then this is one that you would enjoy very much. This is the Van Gogh Museum, opened in 1973 and designed by Gerrit Rietveld, a Dutchman best known for his modernist creations, and we'll look at a few of those in just a second. This is Rietveld's most famous chair. You remember him, I'm sure, now from seeing the chair. And inside the museum, you will find a spectacular collection of works by Van Gogh, strongly recommended. You might find it amusing to know that all of the security personnel are trained to recognize visitors, which is nearly 100% of the crowd in the museum. And when they discuss the artist, they have learned and do say Van Gogh rather than Van Gogh, which is the way it's pronounced. You see, I can do that one also because I've said it so many times. Anyway, here are the Potato Eaters, one of his most famous and early painting from 1885. And Van Gogh's objective with this painting was to create the actual sensation of these people having their simple meal, and of the viewer being there with this family. This is crucial to the concept of reciprocity in viewing a work of art, and Van Gogh has succeeded with it mightily here. This picture, on the other hand, is by Joseph Israels of 1882, with the same idea of showing the peasant family, but it's rather stiff and frankly unsuccessful. And here you see with absolute clarity the difference and the genius of Vincent van Gogh, even at this early stage. We'll take a look at just a quick few things by Van Gogh as a progression through his style and his life. He visited in 1887 with his brother and had this apartment on Rue Le Pic. This is a view from the window of that apartment. Take note of the style. Here is another from 1886. These are both in Paris, of course. And this is a work by Georges Seurat of 1887. Seurat was the dominant force in illustrating the use of color by placing small dots one next to the other to create the impression of a third color or a different idea than the two individual colors. And so he had a very strong influence, which you saw there in the picture from Rue Lepic in Paris on Van Gogh. And now you see another influence. This is Camille Pissarro, who was a friend and mentor for Van Gogh. Talk briefly about the sunflowers in 1889. These were done in the city of Arles. Van Gogh was ill. He felt the strong need, as he often did in his life, to get away, and did so, and created 5 of these famous sunflowers. When he wrote back to his brother Theo, he said, "I'm painting like a person from Marseille eating bouillabaisse." So he seemed to be happy with what he was doing at the time, creating these marvelous large sunflowers. Earlier on in Paris, he had created these of the sunflowers lying down. So I'm sorry, let me go back for a second and say that when he succeeded in convincing Gogh to come and visit him in the area where he was staying in Arles, Gogh saw the sunflowers like this and wanted one. But Van Gogh decorated Gauguin's bedroom with one of these and refused to sell him one of the large sunflowers, and this only added to what was, shall we say, not the most successful relationship between these two very difficult men. Van Gogh moved on, though, and his palette brightened up in 1889 and created these beautiful apple blossoms from his studio in Auvers. And here, for this very quick tour of Van Gogh's progression, is what may be his last painting. It's what they call a double wide. It's 2 French #6 canvases put together side by side to make quite a large painting. So this is a very dark picture indeed. The crows, the looming sky, and the path that seems to lead to nowhere. This is a vision of darkness that seems to be a signpost as to where Van Gogh felt his life was going. You can see quite clearly the difference between the two pictures. Unfortunately, Van Gogh, like Mona Lisa, has fallen victim to the selfie takers. And here, just in the New York City at the Museum of Modern Art, you don't actually get to see the painting, you get to see scenes like this. Okie doke, the Stedelijk, this is the Stedelijk Museum of the 19th and early 20th century. You see both buildings there. Is the Modern Art Museum in the square in Amsterdam. And it contains, there you see the Rietveld chair again. It contains works such as these, the painting on the right by Theo van Dozenberg. These pictures were, this picture and this chair and this movement were created and engendered by a wish to separate these artists from themselves from other branches of modernism that were more dominant at the time. Of them all, the most famous is Piet Mondrian, and this is a picture by him of 1930. And what is interesting about it to me, firstly, it's in primary colors, which people in the arts refer to as painting like music in a major scale. And it also has no boundaries on the outsides. There are no black lines bounding the picture on the outside. And I would draw your attention to the fact that this has strong similarities with, of all people, Cézanne, who left the edges of his paintings as an area of contemplation and wonder as to what else might be there. Again, this is a subject for a whole seminar, and if we meet, I hope some of you will ask me about it and we can talk about it in more detail. This one, Mondrian. And here we have the Cobra movement, another of these separatist movements. This one is by Karl Appel, and the idea here was to use other sources than the traditional ones of inspiration for works of art, including, in the case of the Cobra people, the drawings of children. Now we'll run through a series of these storefront museums in Amsterdam, which are absolutely wonderful. This one is eyeglasses. This one is pipes. And this one, of course, the Sex Museum. Any of you who visited Amsterdam as adolescents, as I did, know that there is such an atmosphere in Amsterdam. And this particular museum gets more than 500,000 visitors per year. To give you some idea of what that means, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, for example, a major international museum, receives about 1 million visitors. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, on the level of the National Gallery or the British Museum or the Hermitage, receives about 4 million visitors. So here you have the Sex Museum in Amsterdam, 500,000 visitors a year, proving once again that anything with the word sex in it is going to be attractive. This one is the Tattoo Museum. I'm sorry, this one is torture, very sorry. Torture, tattoo, and this one is the Marijuana Museum, another popular activity in Amsterdam, and this one is the Tattoo Museum. No end to these, as you can see, and you can amuse yourself and learn something at the same time with these very modest attractions rather than dipping into the major museums. Finally, we have the Cat Museum. I think it's finally. No, it's not finally. This one is the Bible Museum. Both the Cat Museum, let me show you that one again, and the Bible Museum have very impressive interiors, which are worth visiting in their own right. And the Houseboat Museum. And finally, this one is called Electric Ladyland. If you're from New York City, you know that that was the name of Jimi Hendrix studio on 8th Street down in the village, but it's been adopted here for this museum of electric light and so forth, neon, that sort of thing. +1, my +1 for this area is The Girl with the Pearl Earring. One of the most famous paintings in the world is in the museum in The Hague, and you can travel there. It's about 50 kilometers, 30 odd miles from Amsterdam, a very easy trip, and you can see her there. Her success is very clearly in the artist's ability to place her against a dark background and make it seem as if she is communicating directly with you. Plenty of people have tried to compare this to Mona Lisa, all that sort of thing. I find it to be a stunning, direct, as they say in Italian, simpatico painting in its own right and doesn't need comparison to anything. However, we have this photograph. Everyone knows who this is, right? Not telling. But there she is again. Okay, it's Scarlett Johansson. And that is she in her costume as the girl with the pearl earring for the film of the same name. One's a photograph, one's the painting. We can talk about, again, when I meet you, we can talk about which you think is better. Let's move on now to the marvelous, marvelous city of Bruges, a small city with a very well-preserved medieval core, and so many delights that a short visit will not be sufficient time. This is the art gallery in Bruges, and it contains this major masterpiece by Jan van Eyck of 1434 of a donor, the man on the right, with his patron saints and the Virgin enthroned with the child Jesus. This was becoming a very popular subject and format at this time, and Van Eyck succeeded with it to such a degree that this picture is commonly referred to as the masterpiece of masterpieces, and is worth a visit to this art gallery just to see this one painting. This is a predecessor picture showing you still the retaining the Byzantine influences, the gold ground and so forth. There you see them together, and just how far Van Eyck took the idea of painting this sort of subject. In addition, the painting is full of magnificent tiny details. Again, if you go, bring your opera glasses along or binoculars, whatever you have with you, because you can train them on these details and appreciate just how remarkable this picture is. There's possibly a self-portrait in there somewhere, so they say. See it just one more time. This picture was famous in its own time and continues to occupy its position of importance right up until today. In addition, on the other end of the scale and the timeline is Magritte. You can enjoy these pictures purely for the fun and the beauty of the objects depicted without worrying about all the difficult symbolism, which is probably what Magritte would have told you himself. And Miro, the great Miro, this one is called Cat Encircled by the flight of a bird. The cat encircled by the flight of a bird, and it contains all sorts of motion and activity and predates this is 1941, all of the other modern art that has to do with automatic writing and what some people think is just scribbling. I think we can see from this picture that scribbling it is not. Let's talk for a second about the most important work of art in the city of Bruges. It is this Madonna and Child in the Church of Our Lady. We took a special trip to Bruges just to see it the last time we were there. And like Van Eyck's picture of 50-odd years or more earlier, this shows the Virgin and the child Jesus, which was becoming increasingly a popular subject. Here, the child is shown nearly in 3 dimensions, a rather precarious bit of sculpting, which is very successful here. And the thing that everyone wants to know when I show this slide is, are we going to see George Clooney and Matt Damon? No, we're not. They were the fictional Monuments Men who rescued this thing the second time. The real Monuments Men were people like Ted, like the former director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and others, not as good looking as George Clooney and Matt Damon, but they're the ones who rescued this picture from the salt mine in 1944, where the Germans had taken it. They simply went into the church, wrapped it in mattresses, threw it in the back of a truck, and took it to the salt mine, where they were keeping all of the great works of art. And as a point of interest, it's said that the salt mine and the pictures in it were part of the Hitler's so-called Nero decree, which was that if Germany were to lose the war, that all of these things, all of Germany's industrial infrastructure, as well as this cave, were to be destroyed because, well, because that's the way he wanted it. However, the monuments men were able to rescue all of these things, and the Führer was dispatched with before the Nero decree could be carried out. The sculpture was also stolen in 1794 by Napoleon and was a very popular item in Paris until 1815 when it was returned. So this of 1501 to 4 actually. The Pietà in St. Peter's in Rome, 1498 to 99, precedes the Madonna and Child, but you see the very clear similarities in the Madonna and also in the chiaroscuro, the dark and light effects created by the drapery. This one is called the Groothuis, which is most famous because the family that owned it also had a monopoly on the ingredients that went into making beer. This is the Beer Museum. Also, when we were kids, how many of us went to the, which ones did we go to? Heineken and I forget the other one. But it was a lot of fun because they gave you a free pretzel and some cheese and some mustard. Now you can go to a full-scale beer museum, which uses iPads to guide you through. And coming toward the end, you'll find many, many, many varieties of beer to choose from in Bruges. Well worth sampling a few, maybe bringing a couple of bottles back to the ship to enjoy later. And getting to the end, yes, folks, Bruges is the only city in the world with a beer pipeline. Never mind natural gas pipelines, oil pipelines, all of that. Bruges has a beer pipeline. The reason is, so they say, that they wanted to, this particular brewery wanted to retain its brewing facility in the old city, but could not create a similar facility for bottling and distribution. So they built a 2-mile beer pipeline out of the city where they could do their bottling and distribution. So yes, Bruges has a beer pipeline. There is also a diamond museum. Bruges was a stronger diamond center in its day than either Antwerp or Brussels. And of course, a French fries museum. God forbid there shouldn't be a French fries museum. Not to mention a chocolate museum. So we've covered the major food groups of Bruges along with its most important works of art, and they are beer, French fries, and chocolate. You will find multiple streets with multiple chocolate shops on the street. And so feel free to go in and out, try a little here, try a little there, bring a bunch back to the ship. The last time we did this, the cruise director asked for people to bring him chocolate, and he got more chocolate than he bargained for. All right, so we've come to the end of this curated brief visit to the cultural and artistic attractions of Amsterdam and Bruges. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found a story or two that was worthwhile. I'd like to say again, I'm joining the Viking Mars at the end of this week, and if any of you are on board, please do come up and say hello. We can continue these discussions, but for now, I would like to express my effusive gratitude to Viking Ocean Cruises, to Heather and Paul and all the others on the tremendous Viking.TV team, James and so forth, who have been just absolutely wonderful and patient with someone who's not bad at speaking, but not very good at using the computer. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm glad to have had the opportunity to do this once more for Viking TV. And until the next time, I'll see you.